All right, good evening, folks. Thank you all for tuning in once again to TalkNL. My name is Rudy Norman, and tonight we have a really a great episode for you guys. We're going to be talking with a number of different people, actually, but they are all have one thing in common. They are all candidates for NL Alliance in this ongoing 2020 election or 2021 election. Sorry, the election that never ends. It seems like. So we want to talk to these candidates to see how they're holding up, to see how they're feeling about everything, and also to see how how they feel about the campaign so far, and whether they've continued to campaign and what their thoughts are on the ongoing election. So I'm also joined, obviously, this evening by my co-host, partner in crime, Mr. Graydon Pelly. Sir, how are you this evening?
I'm doing great, Rudy. Thanks for asking. And as you made that comment, I thought I'd quote a person on social media who said, for those of you people complaining about a winter election, it is now a spring election.
It's now
Congratulations.
spring. I know it's now spring election. It's a bit crazy, Graydon. I mean, we've been talking about it for the last couple of weeks, but I mean, since our last talk NL, we've gotten another extension to the deadline. So, I mean, we're literally just making this up as we go along here. So, I mean, there's a lot to talk about this evening for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, looking forward to a great conversation.
Yeah, I am too. So, if you're watching and you have any comments or questions or whatever, we're going to be election focused tonight. The last couple of times, even though we've tried to change the topic, we've noticed that a lot of the questions have been about the election and whatnot, because I guess that's what's on everybody's mind. So, we're diving in tonight. So, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter or wherever. Leave them below. So we're going to start off things tonight with our candidate in Cape St. Francis, Mr. Ryan Lane. Ryan, how's it going this evening, sir?
It is going pretty well, sir. Pleasure to be on the show, I guess. I have to call it a show now, yeah.
I tell you, we're moving up in the world, Ryan. Like we tried to have it try to have a quality production here for the people,
No, absolutely. I think people are enjoying it for sure, and it is truly a pleasure to be on.
Yeah, and you've been doing well. Things have been faring well. For you in the ongoing campaign?
Yeah, well, I mean, outside of the obvious never-ending nature of it and that sort of thing, it's been pretty good. This is my second time around now with the Alliance in this district. So I have to say it's been fairly positive, a lot more feedback, generally speaking, this time around than there was last time, which is nice. And definitely some people reaching out with support this time that I didn't hear from before. So that's all pretty positive. I think the message of change is getting out there. Everybody feels it. I think they're just having a hard time putting it to words in terms of how they move forward, how we move forward as a province. And I think the Alliance is offering that kind of option for people. I think they're finally starting to see it. It's going to take a while. Change is always scary for people, but I think it's definitely been a positive one.
Awesome. Good to hear. Good to hear. Next up, we've got our candidate in Mount Pearl North. That was a hard one to say. Mr. William Neville. William, how's life in Mount Pearl North? Oh, you're on mute, William. Hold on. Let's see if we can get you off mute. How are you?
There we go, yeah.
There we go.
Not bad. Glad to hear today that we're going to move to level 4, so no new cases today. So I think that's a wonderful thing that we're heading back towards, I guess, easing of some restrictions. And
Great.
So it's been a challenge. I found this recent one to be more challenging than the first lockdown. I'm back to work, so I'm actually not allowed to be campaigning, I guess, during regular hours since I'm back to work. So one of the pitfalls of being a candidate who had a specific amount of time that they could take to do campaigning. So that's
And I
unfortunate.
definitely, yeah, and we're definitely going to talk about that in a little bit as we get into this discussion, because that's a very interesting point. And when I saw mentioned earlier on Twitter today as well, some other people are in the same boat, and so that's definitely something that we'll chat about in a little bit, William. So next
Sounds
up
good.
we've got a candidate that's also returning from the last election in 2019, but it's the first time that we've had him here on a podcast, because the last live we did, he I don't think he was even a candidate. Were you, Shane? Were you a candidate the last time? I think we
Oh, yeah.
announced you the day after the last time we did a
I see what
live.
you mean. Yeah,
Yeah.
I managed to get my paperwork in right at the last minute.
Yeah. So Shane Snook is in St. George's Humber. So how's things on the West Coast, the far West Coast?
Pretty today. Beautiful
Yeah,
day out.
beautiful. It was.
Which is
It
really
was
nice for folks like me who have a lot of ice buildup out on the driveway, so I was able to chip a bunch of that out of the way.
as long as it's not on your roof.
Yeah, I mean some, but not as much as it could be. So
Yeah, that's right.
I'll take a win
That's
where I can
good.
get one.
So how have you been enjoying the campaign out in the Humber region, St. George's region?
Well, it's been a difficult run this time around, obviously because of the COVID restrictions, but that kind of goes double for a district like this one, where it's what some people call the highway district, because it spans such a long distance of highway. And so trying to travel all across that and talk to people, especially when you're still working a full-time job, that was been very difficult. So mostly just been relying on trying to get the word out with, the interviews with newspapers or streams such as this one and things like that.
Yeah, that's good. And you participated in a few of these, I think.
Yep. Every
that's good.
opportunity I get. And I've been very happy to have a variety of different, people and organizations reach out for those. So that's been really, really good. It feels good to kind of get that acknowledgement in that respect, as opposed to, just being kind of shoved under the rug, which independents are kind of people assume will happen, but then that hasn't actually been happening. We've been getting more credit than people expect. So it's really good to see.
That's good. That's good. And we'll chat with you again in a second.
Sounds good.
So, and then last but not least, also a return candidate up there in Conception Bay South, our favorite contractor, Mr. Warwick Butler. How's it going, Warwick?
It's been going good. It's been actually really busy. The program that the provincial government put on kept me really busy at this time, and the extended election doesn't help.
No, I would say, I mean, and you're in a similar situation, I guess. You plan for a certain amount of time, but at the end of the day, I mean, you've got to make a living, and your work comes first. And if you're not prepared for this extended election, then you've got to find that balance, right?
Oh, for sure. But I guess one thing that it does bring to light is the reason we're here. I mean, that for this to be happening, nobody expected it. Blame COVID or not. I mean, the time of the election is just not right. And here we are.
Exactly.
What's it going to cost us?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm going to bring the rest of the guys in here so that we can get this show on the road. So, I mean, like I said, how's everyone feeling about the extension? I'm going to start with you, William, to start off, because I want to circle back to this. You took your annual leave, right, to do this election. How did you approach that when the extensions came about?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely been a challenging election. There's no doubt about that. But being back to work, I'm not allowed to campaign, I guess, during regular hours. So that kind of cuts out a big chunk of time from being able to do that. But you know what? I haven't really done a whole lot since, because as far as I'm concerned, this election, once they keep extending it, it's not really fair to everyone. Certainly some candidates, obviously, like in my situation, it's not fair. to voters. There's certain aspects of this that's not fair. They should have known long before this that they were going to need to have a certain amount of time for everything. They needed to know that they lacked the capacity, I guess, even just to count votes and how long it would take to get votes returned to St. John's for counting and stuff. They should have had that better figured out, and then they could have had a longer timeline for people to apply. So now basically they've cut off the timelines for when people can actually apply to get a ballot, but now they're keeping on extending for people to get their ballots in. So if they had done their job, a good job up front, we would have known that we could have extended applying for the ballot by several weeks as well, right? And that's just not fair. You've also got the established parties who rely probably more on staunch supporters and don't have to get out there and get the word out as much as a new candidate and as a new party. We rely on being able to get out there and canvass door to door is a big thing. Certainly we don't have the budget like the Liberals and the PCs, for example, would have to get out there and be buying advertising. So established parties now and the bigger parties that have a big war chest are definitely getting an advantage here. And this whole election has been very unfair. And I'm very disappointed, to be quite honest with you. The last thing I guess I want to say here too is that Andrew Fury said that he talked to Bruce Chalk some time ago and to confirm that it was okay to hold an election at this time. So I mean, they would have had to have discussed things like what happens if there's lockdown. Are we prepared to switch to primarily mail-in ballots? All these things. And it turns out that even if they discussed them, if they didn't discuss them, they should have. And it turns out that the TalkNL were absolutely not prepared for an election during a pandemic. And the fact that they had those discussions early on, and this is now, they're just flying by the seat of their pants. And this says a lot about TalkNL, and it also says a lot about the Liberal Party, as far as I'm concerned.
Back to your point that you mentioned earlier on, William, about, as far as I'm concerned, for all intents and purposes, as I've listened to the different candidates, this election now, the way it has gone, has certainly played into the hands and favor of the incumbent candidates. Because by the looks of things, for all intents and purposes, the election campaigning was over for anyone outside of incumbent candidates on the 13th when the election was supposed to be. So it has certainly played in favor of the incumbents. We have ministers in the government, in the caretaking government, as we're told by the Premier on several occasions. That point has been made intentionally. And we still have these ministers now that are out in the media that are making announcements and campaigning and using the pandemic or using the extensions and the media whenever they can to promote their re-election for all intents and purposes. I mean, I think it's, like you said, it's totally wrong what's been going on.
Yeah, and I mean, my thing is that there is no rhyme nor reason. Like everything is just made up literally as we go along, right? So I mean, there's no rules. My big thing today that I just came to the realization of was the fact that we started counting ballots and then we extended the deadline again. So the deadline was extended after ballots were started to be counted. So I mean, how legitimate or how fair is that when we already know a partial result, and as a result of, and after that, after knowing a partial result, we change the rules and allow a longer time for ballots to be returned?
Yeah, I mean,
it's a couple of things. First of all, I think it's the decisions have been really strange from the beginning. That they could have at least decided at some point to take a set amount of time and say, hey, this is going to take us a really long time to fit. Once they decided we were no longer going to be doing an in-person vote, which happened at the very last minute, obviously. But once that decision was made, they should have at least taken the time to make the correct decision after that, to give themselves and everybody enough time to be able to manage the ballots in whatever appropriate way that was, as opposed to, oh, it's now going to be, this is the deadline. And oh, no, we can't make that. Now, this is the deadline. No, we can't do that either. So now this is the deadline, and it keeps changing and changing and changing. And obviously that's made a big difference in terms of how people are even responding. This is making people feel more disenfranchised from the process than ever before, really. I mean, the voter turnout is going to be, if not the lowest, and amongst the lowest ever for sure. I'd be willing to bet it's going to be the lowest, certainly in a very long time. And that's obviously not doing any good for anybody. And then at the very end, when this is all said and done, we haven't even talked about the legitimacy or the potential illegitimacy of this election when it's all said and done. I mean, this might end up being meaningless. This might be a complete waste of time, outside of the fact that at least we've highlighted these deficiencies in the system, which is all well and good, but I don't know why we had to have an election to do that.
I find it interesting. I don't know how many of you follow the Uncle Gnarly blog, but we certainly see lots of things out there. And he had a guest presenter, Ron Penny. Some of you might be familiar with Ron Penny. Ron's certainly been involved with the political scene in Newfoundland and Labrador for a number of years, heavily involved with legislation. And in fact, he worked at drafting legislation and for a number of years. But his question is, an election in time of COVID, is a special ballot election legal and legitimate? That was Monday, the 1st of March, 2021, that he was the guest presenter there. It's worthwhile to go in. I've got the article here, actually. It's worthwhile to go in and read the points that he made about the legitimacy and the if it's legal or not. But the overall point that he makes in this is that a voter's right to vote. And Ryan mentioned about this is probably going to be the lowest turnout. And I've said this a number of times on different interviews and social media. It's possible for us now to elect a government, whether it's minority or majority, praying that it's going to be a minority, to elect a government with about 20 to 25% of the eligible voters making the decision. I mean, how legitimate is that?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
it is.
that's sad.
It is sad. So with that in mind, then, when we think about that, with that in mind, when we think about democratic reform or electoral reform, like a lot of people are talking about it now, but I thought about this afternoon as I was walking, actually. Everyone is talking about now that Elections NL and the Elections Act has got to be looked at and it's got to be changed. Are MHAs now going to use that as a means of steering democratic reform away from the House of Assembly and steering it towards Elections NL? Is that going to be a way, an excuse now? They're going to say, okay, now here's a way for us to refocus this democratic reform thing to Elections NL rather than the House of Assembly and the way legislation is done and the way government operates. Is that what they're going to do from here on in?
Well, I mean, they're going to do the same thing they've always done, no matter which party gets in, which is they're going to minimize the amount of change that influences them. So if they have to focus on the elections side of things in order to appease people, because clearly people are going to want to see some kind of action take place here, and we need it, there's no doubt. But I mean, they're going to focus on whatever works best for them, whoever they are. And I mean, that probably is going to mean very little in terms of democratic reform, if any, quite frankly. I'll be shocked if there's any real democratic reform that happens. I mean, outside of the actual act of voting.
Mm-hmm. I've got another point here that was made in this article, and I want to get all of you guys to chime in on this. This is, and I quote Mr. Ron Penny. He said, the chief electoral officer was placed in a very difficult position by the decision of the premier to call the election in the middle of a pandemic. So we've heard a lot of people criticize Bruce Chalk and Elections NL. So is this sort of steering the blame away from Mr. Chalk and Elections NL and putting most of the blame on the Premier? What do you think?
I'll start. I mean, at the end of the day, as I mentioned earlier, at least it was reported, and I think Andrew said, Mr. Fury said that as well, that he met with Bruce Chalk beforehand. Okay, so if I was going to meet with somebody and say, you know, are we good to go for an election at this time? And that meant winter, and it also meant pandemic. Okay, so Bruce Chalk and Andrew Fury had a conversation, and Bruce Chalk either told him, yeah, no worries, we got this.
Well, that's what we've been told, he told them.
Fair enough. Or he told Andrew Fury that, you know, we're going to have some challenges, and we need some time to come up with a contingency plans and to review the rules and regulations and everything to make sure that we're prepared for that. And, you know, which one of those happened, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, regardless of which one happened, Bruce Chalk, once the Premier went and spoke to him initially and indicated that there may be election, and we knew weeks in advance that there was a likelihood that he was going to do that because he was going to use the situation to try to get a majority. So what did Bruce Chalk do in the weeks from that time to come up with any contingency plans? And he also had weeks after that before things went sideways. And what did he do at that time? I'm not sure what he did with that time, because it doesn't seem like they had any contingency plans, any conversations or anything. I almost believe now that when they met, they just said, yeah, who cares? It's not a big deal. Let's just go. And,
well, if you go back to any of the tapes that were put out in the public, and I've seen them pretty well, all of them, because I was off recovering during most of this time. But you go back and the Premier clearly says that Mr. Chalk said, we can handle the election. Now, I realize the numbers were low at the time. However, back to what you said, anything could have happened during this pandemic. So obviously, William, back to your point, the answer is, on my part, and from what I observe, and everyone else, I want you to chime in, there was no contingency plan put in place for the worst case scenario.
Yeah, so the last thing I would just want to mention, before, and then we'll go to someone else. If you're the leader and you're going to call an election, and you go to Elections NL and you ask them, are we prepared? Is it good? Are we good to go? Is it a yes or no answer? And if he says yes, that's it. You hang up and you move on. That's ridiculous. If the Premier sits down with Bruce Chalk of Elections NL and asks him, he should be asking additional questions. So, it is not just a yes or no answer. So come on, that's ridiculous. If he just waited for a yes or no answer, then this Premier we're in big trouble. If it's always yes or no answer and that's it, and there's no getting any extra details, we're in big trouble.
So Shane, I want to come to you. There's a comment over here by Mr. Paul Lane, the candidate in Mount Pearl Southlands. Bruce Chalk has said he was prepared for a COVID election with in-person voting. What do you think of that?
I struggle to see how those preparations were made. I'm not fully up to date on all of the things that were actually put in place, but it seems to me like there was definitely a lot left lacking. I know in my mind, the idea of even entertaining the idea of the election before the spring struck was a mistake. Wait until the snow and the ice is gone, let that potential wrench in the system go away, give us a little bit more time for the rollout, and then entertain the idea. But then from there going forward, I don't understand why there wasn't a thorough review of the elections process, or the making sure the measures were in place. so that we try to go through the election process and then, okay, we have this problem. Here are plan A, plan B, plan C to resolve those issues. That plan really needed to be in place and be reviewed beforehand, and I don't understand why it wasn't.
Absolutely. So Warwick, we know that, of course, we couldn't do an in-person one because the chief medical officer stopped it, basically. So now, is it on Bruce Chalk or is it on the Premier? Because we certainly weren't ready for a mail-in ballot or online voting. We weren't ready for any of these because we know that because of where we are today. So who do you think? Should Bruce Chalk have said to the Premier, we're not ready? Because we know that they weren't. Obviously, anyone can see that. They weren't ready. So should he have said that? And could he have stopped? I wonder, could he have stopped the election?
Good question. Obviously, like evidence shows, they definitely weren't prepared for the election. Or probably prepared for the election, wasn't prepared for the pandemic, sorry. But at the end of the day, I feel, it was obviously pressure from the Premier. Or he did he did a bad job in his position, meaning Bruce Chalk. He either dropped the ball thinking he was ready, or my personal opinion, he knew he wasn't ready, but he got pressured. That's my take on it.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, could you delay it? Like I firmly believe we got to do everything we can to make this as legit as we can, because we can't afford to do another election. We can't even afford, what do we do? It's going to cost us a fortune either way. We got delays. We got no budget. We got delay in the Green Report. There's no decisions being made. Every time government takes upon themselves to make these type of decisions, it leaves us as a province whole in the bag. We can't afford these type of things. And I think it would be stopped. Like Paul Lane, I give a lot of credit. He's an independent. He's doing his job out there. We need to hold our MHAs responsible. If we can't hold them responsible, we're going to be back here. This is just one issue, one topic. I can name off lots. You start with the Muskrat Falls. In the last 10 years, what have we had? Increased taxes, like decisions that you got to listen to the experts, and this just wasn't a good decision.
Absolutely.
Can I chime in real quick with a thought?
Yeah, go ahead.
There was a little bit of discussion revolving, who's responsible, who had the the final say, so to speak. And my understanding is that the rate is dropped on the advisory or on the advice of the Premier by the Lieutenant Governor. Why isn't there more conversation on that? That final line of defense for the people not actually giving the no. Is it just me, or is that not an option that is being overlooked right now? Should not the Lieutenant Governor have been able to just say, no, this is not a good time for that?
Okay, go ahead, Ryan.
No, sorry, you go ahead first.
No, I was just going to lead off with a question from that. So Shane, your question is basically what we're asking is who had the power to stop this foolishness that we've had to go through for the last weeks and weeks? Who had the power to play their hand and say, look, guys, this is a bad idea. I'm going to pull the plug. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to say is, as far as I understand, and granted, I'm still learning. There's lots I don't know yet. But as far as I understand, wouldn't the Lieutenant Governor have the option of declining that and just putting the wall up, so to speak?
Yeah. So my understanding is that yes, technically speaking, the Lieutenant Governor can say no. It is only a request from the Premier, but it's basically viewed as a formality. So basically, it's as my understanding is whatever the Premier asks, the Lieutenant Governor is sort of obligated to say yes, but not legally obligated to say yes. It's more of a rubber stamp thing. Premier wants an election, Lieutenant Governor says done, and that's it. And there's no. So technically, yes, the Lieutenant Governor could have said no, I think, but it would be an incredibly unusual precedent. And I think that at the time. Then you've got, of course, the political alliances of the Lieutenant Governor and all that stuff as well, which, of course, always plays a role. But in addition to that, at that time, the case numbers were still not out of hand or anything like that. So I think it would have been a pretty big news story if the Lieutenant Governor had said no to the Premier, basically, huge, basically. Not to say that it shouldn't have happened. I mean, if you're going to talk about blame, there's plenty in terms of who should accept it. I mean, the calling of the election obviously was silly. I mean, all you had to do was wait 6 months, and the vast majority of the province would have been vaccinated, and that would have taken care of a lot of the issues. Let alone the fact that they could have postponed the election with a small piece of legislation that would have taken care of the problem as well. I mean, in terms of what happened in the conversation between Bruce Chalk and the Premier, they are the only two people, or whoever was in that room at that time or on that phone call, they are the only ones who know what was in that conversation, who said what. So at the end of the day, the Premier can say one thing, and Bruce Chalk can say the other, and it makes no real difference because the election should have been called, and Bruce Chalk fell down on his job. Both of those things are true. Like, neither one of those two people did what was in the best interest of the people of the province. Exactly. And I mean, there's no other way to look at it. Like, you can blame them both, and sure, they both bear responsibility, but at the end of the day, we don't vote for Bruce Chalk. He has a 5-year term that's going to be up this year, as I understand it. So he's very likely not going to have, he's going to be polishing up his resume, I would hope.
No renewal.
by the time this year is done. And I mean, the what I would consider is to be the relatively sad part about this is that unless something very strange happens, we're probably going to end up with a Liberal minority government when this is all said and done, or at least in the short term. So I mean, you know what I mean? It's when it comes to this kind of stuff, you've got a small core people who are highly interested in what's happening and commenting. Like, Twitter is the perfect example. You get a small, relatively speaking, group of people who are highly involved, commenting on everything, have some understanding of what's happening. The vast majority of people out there, this is a blip on the radar, quite frankly. They know there are issues, but I don't think most people feel that their involvement, even through voting, is making a significant difference. I mean, my wife was telling me today, one of the ladies she works with was talking about something in our district. We found out she lived here and whatever, and she didn't even get to vote because she actually said she kept meaning to register to have the ballot sent, and just the deadline passed and she didn't get it done. And at the end of the day, I mean, it's just ridiculous. There are no words to describe what is happening right now.
So I want to bring in another comment from Barbara here, and then I'm going to add my 2 cents. Barbara said they certainly didn't consider the votes of 30,000 plus rotational workers in isolation who couldn't vote in person, and majority didn't have time or opportunity to have a special mail-in ballot. For me, this election, I mean, let's go way back. For me personally, this election is totally on the shoulders of the Premier. And the other thing is, hearing from Barbara and talking to a lot of people over the course of this ordeal, I think that the people of Newfoundland were at the bottom of the list when it comes to timing and thinking about and calling this election and looking at the different things. I personally feel that the people were at the bottom of the list when this election was called. It was about party, power, and position.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, the only reason that it was timed when it was is because of the polls. And anything the Premier says outside of that is just fantasy. It's just not true. Like, I mean, if you look at the rationale, like I said, all he had to do was wait long enough for the majority of the population to be vaccinated, which he knew was coming, even if it was delayed, which it has been, obviously. But even with the delay, give it a few months' time, everyone, or at least the majority, are vaccinated. And even if there is a bit of an outbreak, we don't have to go off the rails to try and resolve it. So, I mean, yes, there's no doubt that Bruce Chalk will wear this forever in terms of his response to this. But at the end of the day, he was put in a pretty compromising position, quite frankly. I mean, I do think he bears a great deal of responsibility, but I also think he was asked to do something that was nearly impossible. So whether or not that the asking of him to do that is a larger problem than his inability to do it, I don't know. I mean, does one of them bear more responsibility than the other? At the end of the day, I'd have to say, yeah, it's the Premier, but I mean, it's all a farce, quite frankly. This whole thing, and I mean, I don't know what else to call it. I mean, It's terrible because you have all these people who invest their time and resources, whether it's helping out campaigns or supporting financially or helping with signage or supporting a party or whatever it is that we're all going through right now. And at the end of the day, like I said, this may very well be one of those cases where this goes to the courts at the end of the day. No matter what Chess might say, if the Liberals win government right now, there's a reasonable chance that they're going to contest the election in court, and I would say anybody who does so would have reasonable grounds to do so. This is just, I mean, whether or not Bruce Chalk even has the ability to do the things that he has done is in significant question. Like, I mean, the legislation talks about votes being counted on the same day. Clearly, that's not going to happen. I mean, this stuff is just, it's outside the realm of what anyone would have expected. And I think that it's going to take some kind of miracle for this not to end up in front of the courts.
So back to the point that Rudy made at the beginning, I think I don't know if it's been done before, but now we have votes being counted while votes are coming in. It's just unbelievable. Like every day is a new surprise for me, and I thought I couldn't get surprised anymore, but every day seems like there's a new something that's coming up.
That kind of brings me up to a point I was thinking about earlier, where the absurdity is only topped by the absurdity, and it's something we've been seeing on all kinds of different scales in the world. But in this case, like the issue we have with voter confidence, and I don't want to say voter apathy, I think the right word might be antipathy, where we care, but it hurts to care because it's beyond our control, or we feel like it's beyond our control. And right now, with the voter confidence getting lower by the day, and with every day there's another crisis, another mess, or whatever, and it's just getting we're being pelted by it over and over again, and it's just always so absurd that we're getting kind of dulled to the sense of absurdity. Like, for example, with the Muskrat Fails issue, we've been so caught up in this crisis that we haven't talked about that crisis in a while, right? And it's just over and over again, to the point where the voters can't keep up, and they just end up having to drone out the whole subject, which I think is a big part of why, I know, speaking from the younger generations, the teens and the 20s and the 30s, people don't have time to invest in the government and the conversations that they can't even take themselves seriously, let alone take the opinions and the thoughts and the concerns of potential voters seriously, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. Everything is so busy these days. People have to work all day, and they get home, they're tired. They don't have time for people that aren't going to take the future of the province seriously, or people that they perceive to be doing that. And so that's actually one of the reasons why I've started getting involved in politics, because I hate that toxic political culture, and it's a significant problem, and I want to start working on the solutions to that. And so that voter confidence, the absurdity that's become so normalized, that's something that we really need to address and start steering away from, because it's only going to keep getting worse.
I think the thing that really got me the most, and I think this is the statement that impacted me more than anything else during this election, and it came from, and I'm not going to quote it as it was, but you'll know what I'm talking about, was the idea from Mr. Chalk that he's not concerned about the number of people that vote. He's more concerned about they were given an opportunity. So to me, Elections NL should be all about getting the highest voter turnout possible. But that seems to not be the theme that was put out there by Mr. Chalk. That was the thing I think that really turned it for me. What do you think, William?
Yeah, a couple of things, I guess. I just want to mention, let's call a spade here. Andrew Furey called this election because it benefited the Liberal Party. Okay, it did not benefit the people of this province, and he can't blame this one on his clerk like he has in the past when he's made some difficult or bad decisions. The fact of the matter is that, you know, politics in this province right now is all about party first, and we really need to change that. And I really like some of the things that Shane was saying there, and you know, that's one of the reasons that I'm involved. Back to the Bruce Chalk thing, you know, yeah, that was disappointing to hear that, and I guess I'm a bit surprised that elections and all. I mean, when you think about how much what work they're doing during the time of an election, it makes me wonder what else are they doing when there isn't an election, because it doesn't you know, and I have no insight into that, but it makes me wonder, you know, because an election is only several, you know, 2 months long out of a year, or maybe even every 4 years, you know, really. It should, you know, under normal circumstances. So what else are they doing? I mean, are they trying to make voting more accessible to people? Are they reviewing the laws and the rules and things to see if there's room for improvements? I wonder. You know, I'm tired of hearing of these people that are in these positions. And you know, we talked about the lieutenant governor there a minute ago. I mean, if that's just a figurehead, then why are we even going to her to drop a writ? I mean, it's ridiculous. If that's all she's there is a rubber stamp everything, then what's the point of even doing it? And there's too many of these people in government and in our past who are just figureheads, and it's just ridiculous. It's just such a poor performance all around, and I'm so disheartened. But I'm also inspired in the sense that, like, we need the people that are going to step up and make change. And we talked a little bit earlier about you know, the casualty of all of this might be removing some focus around you know, democratic reform. But you know what? If we got some electoral reform out of that, I'll take that any day, because that's still a win. And you know, it doesn't go far enough. But if we can fix some of the election issues that we have, and absolutely, Bruce Chalk and Elections NL should be very concerned about making voting accessible to as many people as possible. And they should be out talking to people that are disenfranchised and disillusioned and everything else, and finding out why that is, and seeing if there's ways that we can change that, because they are supposed to be non-biased, and they should be listening to everybody and finding out ways to improve the system. And I don't think they're doing that. They run an election for the 2 months or whatever it is every 4 years under normal circumstances, and I wonder if they're doing anything else.
I want to get you guys all of your opinions on something else that I've been thinking about lately, and I've had this conversation.
Before you go on, can I have one comment?
Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Comment there. So I just want to. I don't know enough about Elections NL to really dig into what we're talking about here, but I will say that think for a moment that it's possible that the mandate of Elections NL might not cover encouraging people to vote. For example, their mandate and their legislative responsibility may be very specific to the point of providing the opportunity to vote. Now, they've fallen down on that. There's no doubt about it. But what I'm saying is, like, I'm not sure if we can lay as much at their feet in terms of people's, like I said, I don't like calling it apathy either, but people's non-voting as we are possibly apt to do. I mean, they are a government organization that is responsible for operating elections, and I don't know that their mandate includes engaging people or like marketing, for example, to get people out to the polling stations. I think that their mandate is very specific to, if you want to vote, we provide you with the opportunity to vote. Now, they haven't done that this time around. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that they have. I'm just saying that I'm not sure that their mandate is to the point where they can be blamed for engagement. They can certainly be blamed.
How can you really separate that from Elections NL? Elections NL, I know they're in charge of running elections, but in running elections, I think part of that has to be making a means whereby the most possible people have the easiest opportunity to vote.
Yes, yeah, and I think that's probably what their mandate is, and that, like I said, they've no doubt, I think, failed pretty terribly here. But what I'm saying is that I don't think that we can blame them for apathy, and I hate using air quotes as well. But like, if you were given the opportunity to vote and you chose not to do it for whatever reason, then that's different than not having the opportunity to vote. So if in the case of like northern native communities, people didn't have translation services available, so theoretically they were literally unable to read the ballot, that is not being provided the opportunity to vote. That is a blatant failure. Like 100%, that is a failure of their mandate. I don't care about timing. That is, quite frankly, irrelevant. That is their job, and they didn't do it. Now, that is different than trying to engage people into the process. That's not the same thing, I don't think. Now, I understand that they failed in a raft of ways during this election, but I don't think we can. I don't think we can really blame them for voter engagement. I think we can definitely blame them for not providing the opportunity in a fair way to everyone to be able to vote. That's what they are supposed to do, and that's what they did not do.
The party system does a great job of disengaging people.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
you can't blame.
No. When
we
were talking, just if somebody was talking a few minutes ago about this is exactly right.
Yeah.
When Shane was talking about all the stuff that's happening right now, you look at the global situation in terms of the economy and COVID, and locally we've got ridiculous budget concerns, and we've got Muskrat Falls, and we've got all this, and this is just the peaks, right? This is not even the day-to-day grind that people put up with to deal with.
Yeah.
These are the major things. So when you've got all that happening, what happens is people in the generally speaking in the party system, they will focus their attention on what they want you to be focused on, and that takes your attention away from other areas where you might want to know more. But if you want to know more about something and nobody's talking about it, most people just give up, honestly.
That's why it's so important to have, you got to hold them accountable. If we don't know what they're voting for inside of a party, we're going to, again, I keep going back, we're going to have these issues. It's just going to be a different topic, same problem. But until we get that system, and people got to realize, I know we're there. I know that I'm preaching to you guys, but I mean, at the end of the day, people got to realize that it's just not working. It's just not working.
Yeah. So going back to the point that I was going to ask, and I know we're getting short on time, but with 5 people on like this, it certainly takes a long time for everybody to have their say. But let's look at this part of it, and we go back to, I think it was the point that William made earlier. We all know this: the lieutenant governor and the chief electoral officer, they're employees of the government. They're employees of the ruling government. Okay. So that's a bit of a situation there in itself. But I've been thinking about this. I've had the conversation. I noticed like we got Paul Lane on here listening to us. So Paul is invited to chime in here in the comments as well. So my big thing now is I'm convinced, I know that we have to, when we look at democratic reform, when we look at government, we have to, and I feel that Premier Fury, I thought it was going to be different. I really did. But it seems like Premier Fury has brought centralized control back to the Premier's office more than ever before. Reports are being brought back to the Premier's office, or at least we thought they were, but obviously the Green report wasn't. But there's too much power in that office. That has to change. We have to take some power away from the Premier's office and not let the Premier, let's face it, as I said before, the election was called by who? Whether the Lieutenant Governor could have said no, or Bruce Chalk could have said no, or the Chief Medical Officer could have said absolutely not. But when it comes down to it, the power is in the Premier's office. So I personally think one of the biggest things we need to change in this province and in a lot of provinces and in our federal government, there's too much power in the Premier's office.
Absolutely.
I mean, if Clem is not here, of course, Clem's one of our cats. Clem would wholeheartedly agree with you. That's actually one of the things he's spoken out about a number of times, to divest that power to potentially multiple individuals or some other type of situation other than having it all held by one person.
Yeah. I mean, when the Premier came out and said, it's my prerogative to have this election, whether you want it or not, it's up to me. I'm going to make the decision when I make the decision, and it's my decision and my decision alone. The question is by Paul Lane is this: is the power really in the Premier's office or in some back room directing the said office?
Yeah.
Well,
now we got it done now.
I would say, what's the difference? I mean, there's no difference in that. I mean, the back rooms of government is obviously where all the decisions are made. There's no doubt about it. And of course, Paul knows full well. He's been involved. It might be independent now, but Paul's been involved with party politics for a long time. I mean, the decisions are not made solely in the Premier's office, except possibly when maybe one or two previous premiers were there, but generally speaking, the back rooms are where all the deals take place. I mean, it's wheeling and dealing everywhere. There's no doubt about it. It's just that it's a failing in a sense of our system of how the argument is, well, I want to make a difference. Okay. So I want to make a difference in government. I join a party because they're more likely to get elected. So I'm in with the party to get elected so that I can make a difference. Well, then I have to compromise certain things that I want to put forward because they don't fit with the party platform. And I'm willing to make small sacrifices for that to happen. So then I get myself elected. And then everyone says, well, okay, 4 years is not enough time to accomplish anything. So your number one goal is to get yourself reelected. And now I've got 4 years where I have to focus on what I need to do to get myself reelected so I can try to make actual change happen. And the things that really need to change are on the back burner, or there's some lower priority for me. Instead, I'd rather have my name on a billboard saying that, this project was sponsored by, was covered by so-and-so department of whatever. It makes no difference. And that's, or I want to get out and talk to the media about whatever makes me look good. And I'm not saying that that's the sole purpose for everyone who gets themselves in a ministerial position, but we know that that's part of the program, that our system is upside down. We focus on these people as if they as if they are doing things in our best interest when they're not. They're doing things in their own best interest. And
so when we say decisions are being made in back offices, are we talking about elected MHAs or bureaucrats?
Well, both. I mean, depending upon how you look at it or which department you're talking about, some MHAs, depending upon who they are, and usually their authority position within the party, they can make decisions that will actually happen. But there's no doubt that there are others that don't have that authority within the party, and the decision then tends to be made by either others in the party and they just espouse that decision, or it's made by senior bureaucrats. And there's a certain part, like I worked in the Department of Municipal Affairs for a few years, and I understand that one of the problems with how we move people around government and we say, okay, you're going to be the minister of this for 2 years, and then we're going to stick you somewhere else for 6 months, and then somewhere else for another year, and you don't get the real understanding of what the department is all about necessarily. So bureaucrats are the ones usually who tend to stick around longer, except for occasionally some of the DMs and stuff, because they move them around too. But sometimes they're the people who actually know what's happening. So it's hard to have a conversation with a minister if they don't actually know what's happening within their own department. That happens all the time. And if you guys, I'm sure Rudy's had an experience similar to this, and other people have too, where you set up a meeting with a minister to talk about an important issue, and the minister doesn't even really know what you're talking about. So the senior staff who are there are the ones who do all the talking. They're the ones who know the fine details. They're the ones who are really involved in day to day. And that's not necessarily terrible, but they're not the ones who should make the decision, right? That's where our system sort of falls down. But the problem is that we've always had, not about always, but in the last number of years, we've had positions where we've had parties where they don't even let senior executives make decisions because all the decisions have to benefit the party. Because if they don't, then they're not getting themselves reelected, which means they're falling down on their number one objective.
One of the things that I question One of the things that I question about what's been going on for X number of years and years actually, but more so in the past, and what I'm finding is things that are being done that we know is not right. It's not a proper process. It's so blatant and it's so out there now that it seems like I'm going to do this. It doesn't matter. I'm going to do it anyway. But when I hear MHAs and when I hear political leaders talk about things have to change, when I hear constituents, voters saying things have to change, there's got to be democratic reform, I'm very curious as to what these elected officials really mean, or what the leaders mean when they say democratic reform has to take place. We know what we have put forward and what we feel. We know what NL Alliance feels should change, and a lot of people that we've talked to. But really, when we speak of democratic reform, what is it our elected MHAs and our leaders really feel should happen, and what they would work towards to starting the process of democratic reform? I'm curious about that.
Clearly, not a lot.
Yeah.
No, I don't think most of them don't mean anything. They say it because they think it's what people want to hear. I don't think they say it because they mean it. I mean, or even if they do mean it in their hearts, like if you're a minister in a government and you look at the system, you say, wow, this thing is really broken. But you know what? There's not really much I can do about it. So I'm going to say what people want me to say, and I'm going to carry on doing what I have to do. And that's, I think, what happens year after year after year. So, I mean, they may use words like democratic reform, but at the end of the day, when it comes time to really make significant change, they're not likely to do that. And it doesn't matter what department we're taking. I mean, we're talking about democratic reform right now, but I think it applies across the board to almost any department, is that significant change is always a difficult thing because there are always those who oppose it. And they're not always the same people. The different groups or individuals will oppose whatever change you're talking about. I mean, let's face it. If we took a random cross-section of a dozen or 20 or 50 people and sat them down in a room and we said, look, all right, here's a blank slate, come up with a system that makes sense and see what it looks like, you could do that exercise 20 times and you'd almost come up with the same responses every time. That, like, democracy and how it should work is not a mystery. It's just that the structure and the operation of it tends to not work the way people want it to because it's tampered with. Yeah. That's what happens all the time. People stick their fingers in it and they say, oh, well, we can't let people do this, or we can't let that person do that because that gives them too much authority. And I don't want to allow them that much ability to be able to do something because it takes away from my ability to be able to do something. And as long as that type of compromise doesn't exist, then it's just, I mean, like you take committees and stuff within government are the same thing. Like you can have an all-party committee all you want, but at the end of the day, if they don't have the ability as legitimately to vote as a group on changes and then have government enact those changes, then it's almost a waste of time. It's not quite, because you can actually sometimes drive good conversation and things will come of it eventually. But at the end of the day, if you can't say, you know, there's 4 of us or 5 of us or whatever, we're all from different parties or groups and independents and whatnot, and we're going to get together, we're going to design a system or a policy that is going to be enacted by government to make things better. That's what we need. We need to move towards that type of thing. But the problem is that whatever party is in government is not willing to concede any amount of control to anybody else, ever.
Mm-hmm. Guys, time is quickly gone. We've been on for an hour now, believe it or not. But there's so much more I would like to talk to you about and ask you about. But I'm sure we'll do this again sometime soon. I'm sure right after the election we'll have a get-together and discuss the results and what's going to happen. But I'm just going to give each of you an opportunity now to speak just for a sentence or two to the people that would be listening tonight, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. What would you say to them? William?
Well, the first thing I would say to them is stay safe and certainly hope that we get over this pandemic thing pretty soon. The other thing I would say probably, and is one of the main reasons why I'm involved, is that party politics is what's broke, is why everything is broken right now. Even when Andrew Fury first announced he was running for the leadership of the Liberal Party, he said all the right things. He talked about change, doing things differently, blah, blah, blah. And now that he's the leader, he's reverted right back to party first mentality, whatever benefits the party first. And not working together. I'm a big fan of, we've got 40 people in the House of Assembly, and every one of them should be working together. They should all be able to work together. And the powers of government, as you're saying, I think if one person holds too much power, I think that needs to be divested a little bit into the other 40 members. I don't think it should be all about party. We should have all 40 people working together and working for the people of this province, and that's not happening. And that's why this party system is broken. That's why I'm running for NL Alliance. And, NL Alliance would not exist if the other parties were doing a good job.
Thank you, William. Shane?
Hi, thank you. Expect better. Like you said, we're here because we need to be. Change is going to take time, but give it a chance. I'm patient. We all deserve better. We should all expect better. Work with us. We'll get it done.
Thank you. Ryan?
I guess what I would say to people, and it's what I try to whenever I get a chance to speak, is that, again, I think that people know what needs to change. I just think they're kind of afraid to move in that direction sometimes. I think, like, people love to vote for who they think is going to win. That's not just here, that happens everywhere. But what I would encourage people to do is vote for what they want. Vote for the candidates that talk about the issues that are important to them and the change that they want to see happen. To get out there and say, you know what, I like what this person is talking about, and I believe what they believe. Don't just vote for a party because you think they're going to win. I mean, that's how we got where we are. We want people to be engaged in this process as much as possible. I want supporters who are like, I hear what you're saying, and I actually really agree with you. I believe in what you're saying, and I believe in what you believe. And that's where I think we need to move, is we need to get people away from voting in their historical patterns just because, and we need to get people out there and informed and educated and voting for policies, voting for people that believe what they believe, that support ideas that they support. And if that happens, if that ever happens, I think that would be a huge shift, because at the end of the day, everybody in this province, we vote for government every single time. And quite frankly, we're not that good at it. So we need to choose people who actually want to make the changes that we know are necessary. That's it.
Thank you very much. Warwick?
Well said by everybody, I guess. But at the end of the day, for me, I stepped forward because I was affected. All these decisions, I personally think nothing is going to change until we get the system to change. We need to have people involved. We need the district association. We're past this election. I'm not looking for the vote this time because I know it's too late. But at the end of the day, we need to get people involved. We're all fully responsible. The decisions we've made in the past is what's affecting us today. We can't have allegiance, not like a hockey team where, yes, we got our favorite team and we're going to stick to them. We can't finance our province this way. We need to stand up, elect somebody, and hold them accountable.
Thank you very much. Well, folks, all of you guys, thanks again for being here this evening. We appreciate all of your comments, people that put comments in our chat area. Thank you very much. We'll be back again next week, same time, and to have another discussion about all things Newfoundland and Labrador. Be safe, take care of yourself and others, and we'll talk again real soon.
Take care, guys.
Take
Cheers.
care.
See you guys.
We'll talk soon.